Welcome to Latter-day Struggles. This is Valerie. Hello, Nathan.
Hello. Good to be back. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
Good. We're happy to be here. We are on episode number 2 of a 6-part series where we are talking about how religion is political and politics is religious. I'm going to have Nathan, if you would you just go ahead and get us started by giving a bit of a review of last Monday's episode where we talked a little bit about Mormonism and political neutrality.
Yeah. So basically what we talked about is we just kind of opened with this idea that when you and I were younger and a little more orthodox, believing that we had in our minds that this idea of the church being politically neutral was probably a good idea, right? That the church's realm is spirituality and the realm of politics is completely different, and the separation of church and state is a good thing. And then as certain issues came up and we saw the church perhaps breaking their own rules and giving statements on political issues and then staying silent on other issues where we thought there might be some moral guidance that ought to come from the leadership of the church, we began to question a little bit how this should look. We both have had questions about how this should look. And then we went on in that episode to read the church's official statement on political neutrality, and we pointed out that the bulk of the statement talks about the church being willing to give moral guidance, to say, hey, we have the right to talk about the moral principles, but we don't endorse candidates and we don't endorse political parties, nor do we talk against candidates and political parties, trying to stay hands-off on the actual political process. But then at the very end, they kind of circle back around to the political process, saying, okay, there can be some exceptions. And also, by the way, regardless of the morality, you always need to be subject to your governments. And so we pointed out that we move in that statement from moral guidance to authoritarianism, and that we move from a church that tries to stay at a distance by providing some general principles, and we did end up with the church kind of hands-on in the political execution of some things.
Well, and I think the endorsement of follow your leader.
Right.
So either follow your prophet, follow your president. The idea is we want you in the followership role, as opposed to having that discerning power practiced so that we as individuals can not only discern how to vote, but also who to follow in terms of leadership. So, I guess I want to presence the possibility in the spirit of benefit of the doubt. Maybe what they're trying to communicate is, we don't want insurrection, right? In other words, if your party or your candidate does not win, we don't want you to, go, burn down the Capitol or something like that, right? I'm not referring to anything that happened in January a couple of years ago. So, I want to, I get that. And I agree with that, right? Is that when there is an elected leader, we need to have some degree of respect. But I also think under the circumstances in 2026, the reason why I'm on here, honestly, is because as many, if not most of you know, we just recently moved to the West Coast. We live in the Los Angeles area and spend some time in the Pasadena ward, which is a lovely ward thus far, but we also spend some time at a lot of other churches. We are rather the church, hoppers. And I have been stunned. I have been positively stunned by the forthrightness and bravery and courage of many of the churches in the Los Angeles area, protecting the immigrants, talking about ICE, talking about the rise of fascism, talking about what a truly Christ-like community looks like in a 2026 United States, not shying away in any way, shape, or form with issues around social justice. And it's brought tears to my eyes because I'm like, what is going on? At first I'm kind of like, I have to admit a little bit like, is this appropriate? And then I'm like, yes, Like, it's so important that these moral authorities are stepping up because they have a public voice and they have influence and they are helping communities recognize that people can gather and do the right thing for people that are in harm's way. That matters.
Right.
Yeah. So, anyways, okay, we digress. We digress. But so, yeah, we were kind of just setting things up because today we are going to spend some time talking more deeply about this concept of political neutrality in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. One little piece of the document that we read last week goes as follows. The church is neutral in matters of politics within or between the world's many nations, lands, and peoples. However, as an institution, it reserves the right to address issues it believes have significant moral consequences or that directly affect the mission, teachings, or operations of the church. Okay, we're going to just get down to the nitty gritty of this. Okay, we're going to go super duper granular here. So buckle up because I want to start with talking about there's a stated principle here and then there's an observed principle. Okay, the stated principle, of course, is political neutrality. And to be exact, we don't endorse a party or a candidate. The observed principle is that there is, in fact, high engagement. They claim, the document says, in issues it believes has significant moral consequences. Okay, so according to not only Mormonism, by the way, but most sort of Christian and other non-Christian, but we're talking conservative fundamentalism. So if you're on the side of conservative fundamentalism in your religious system, this is what you're going to be highly engaged and anxious about. Okay, so there's a selective, high intensity engagement around issues that have to do with gender, gender roles, sexuality, marriage, and respect for institutional authority. Okay, so we're looking at, as they see it, those issues that have significant moral consequences to, for our purposes, we're going to focus on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They are very concerned and find it significant that whatever is going on politically reinforces the following: a patriarchal family structure, protecting heteronormative frameworks, and protecting fundamental principles of institutional authority, such as government authority, religious authority, and so on. And furthermore, they are wanting to protect various ideologies and identities connected to the preservation of Christian nationalism. Okay, now you could have just knocked me over with a feather, and I'm not even going to tell you, like, it was not that long ago when I was like, good gracious, we are so entrenched in Christian nationalism. And I mean, the cliques were coming fast and, fast and loose on my side, but I mean, it's right there in our Book of Mormon, y'all. I mean, like, to think that we are not entrenched in this idea that God has chosen and favored us as Americans, and therefore we have, in some way, shape, or form, the go-ahead on all manner of behaviors and ideologies that become laws and that become ways that we treat other people because we are God's favored. It's pretty unfathomable, except for that it's happening. And the church is, in fact, I think, that is part of what they reserve the right to address that they do believe has significant moral consequences. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, so I think that it's really telling, right? Because, just about any issue can be found somewhere in the political realm, right? In what we would call moral issues can be found in the political realm. So I think it's very telling when you look at which issues the church chooses to insert itself into, because what it tells you is what are their main objectives and what are they afraid of, right? And as you pointed out, what they are most interested in protecting is the power structures. So male is better than female, heterosexual is better than LGBTQ, America is better than Iran. We are working to selectively use our supposedly moral voice and try, and we're supposedly staying out of political issues But then you say, okay, but if those political issues have moral implications, okay, so what does the church consider to be the morality that's so critical that it has to jump into the political issues, right? And the ones that come to mind are just what you said. The LGBTQ rights, the ERA was one, right? The ERA had all kinds of potential to threaten patriarchal structures in the United States and probably in the world, but certainly in the church too. And so now the church is saying, okay, we're not going to tell people how to vote except vote against the ERA. And we're not going to tell people how to vote except vote against gay marriage, same gender marriages. Okay, well, that's really telling as to what the church is afraid of.
Right. And so what we're looking at, and we are going to, I keep saying this, but I want to, like, if we just drop a little, something interesting and move on, I just want to reassure you that we're going to keep coming back to these things. But there is a reason that as to why certain churches focus on certain things, and why our church, for example, is going to be focusing on patriarchal structures, heteronormativity, Christian nationalism, and things like that. And it, in more to come, but like in a nutshell, it has to do with development, where they are in their own developmental trajectory. And it's not, it's early on, to put it briefly for now. Okay, so those are the high engagement topics, right? So in other words, reserving the right to address issues it believes have significant moral consequences. Let's spend a second talking about some issues that the church has deemed by default do not have significant moral consequences. Now, this is interesting because, as Nathan just mentioned, these are arguably quite moral issues. Like, these matter. They come up in the world where we live, which is where we reside in terms of our politics and our religion. It's in our everyday lives. So of little or no moral importance, I guess, is the speaking up against any kind of civil rights or systemic racism. Now, I want to pause it and make again, give credit where credit is due. The church did reverse the priesthood and temple ban, yes, but as far as like deep civic engagement in civil rights issues, or talking about the problematic nature of systemic racism, not so much. A little bit, President Nelson did a little bit with the NAACP. I do remember that, but this is minor, okay? Other issues that
Well, and can I just say,
please.
It's also not timely,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's one thing to come 50 years after the civil rights movement, really got into full swing and to say, hey, we are opposed to racism in all its forms. It's another thing to do it in the actual 60s when it mattered. And unfortunately, that's when the church was pretty quiet.
Well, they weren't just quiet. They were actually on the wrong side of history.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were defending the wrong side. And I think that's where, you and I feel so much passion, right? Is that those who are having the willingness to be the reformers in the forefront are the ones that are going to be burned at the stake. But that's important. It's important that we be aware of how every human being's voice and how they choose to stand and how each church chooses to stand is in some ways just simply and with compassion a reflection of where one is in their own identity development. Okay, so we've got the systemic racism it's a low engagement issue. In other words, it is not considered, I'm quoting the statement again, it does not believe it has significant moral consequences. Other issues that seem to not have significant moral consequences, how about economic inequality? How about labor rights? How about wealth concentration? And one that I think is a little bit more complex is the issue of immigration. In 2010, if you'll recall, there was a little bit of an uptick in the church's interest in immigration. And I think that makes so much sense if you think about the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Both further back, we are all Americans, we're all immigrants, people. Unless there's, someone, if one of you out there happens to be a Native American Indian, then that's wonderful. But the rest of us aren't. And so we are immigrants, Mormons are immigrants. And we as return missionaries have, many of us, and I know Nathan and I, we have such a soft spot in our hearts for people who come from other countries. And in our case, because we served in the San Francisco Bay Area, our entire mission was spent speaking Spanish to Latin American immigrants. And so I can't even hardly watch what's going on right now in the face of too much silence by conservative Christian organizations. Now, so the church has there was that uptick in interest about immigration and some beautiful work done. In specifically, I know I have some family that was doing a lot in the Salt Lake City area, but in some ways, I'd be happy to be wrong. So please reach out if I'm completely missing this. It doesn't feel like that is showing up when it matters most right now. So those are the low engagement issues. What say you, Nathan?
I say again the same thing. It just gives you a good indication of what's important to the church. And I just want to say, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because I know we're going to talk about this later. But when you read that list, so go back, scroll up just a second.
Yep.
Okay. So we're talking about civil rights. We're talking about economic inequality and wealth concentration. We're talking about the rights of the workers. We're talking about the way we treat our immigrants. I don't want to touch on this too much because we're going to get to it when we get to episode 6. But I would encourage everybody to go back and read Matthew chapter 25, where Jesus talks about the separation of the sheep and the goats and which issues he brings up as to the ones that are important to him. Okay? Because it isn't the LGBTQ, whether you were gay or not. And it's not whether you were male or female. And it's not whether you obeyed authority figures. Matthew 25 is very specific about the prisoner and the naked and the hungry and the homeless and the hungry as to who the Savior worries about. So again, I don't want to get too far ahead, but go back and read Matthew 25 after listening to those two lists that Valerie just read.
Thank you for that, Nathan. As I was listening to you, what sort of came up for me is how very distant we are from Jesus of Nazareth when we think about when we are silent and when we speak up as conservative Christian nationalists. Because once again, to return to this list, finding it to be of minimal importance, issues that do not have significant moral consequences being systemic racism, economic inequality, labor rights, wealth concentration, and immigration issues. This sounds like a list that comes from a church or a business that is white capitalist. They don't, authoritarian capitalists. They don't want to address, as capitalists, issues like labor rights, economic inequality, and wealth concentration, much less issues of civil rights, because it's not in the best interest of the Christian nationalist who is blessed for their righteousness. Right. You are made wealthy and rich because God is blessing you, which by default makes it awfully inconvenient if Jesus were ever to come and ask us to look at those on the margins who might actually prevent you and your profit margins.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's reinforced in the Book of Mormon quite a bit, right? That dark skin was the curse, that when you are righteous, you will prosper in the land. And so these ideas of wealth and being the right race and being, the right in the right religion, they're reinforced in our doctrine is that I really don't see in Matthew chapter 25. And it becomes very complex when you have these competing interests. What do you do politically when you have these competing interests? Well, what you say and what you don't say, the topics you choose to address and the topics you choose not to address tell the story. They tell the answer to that question. And I know you've got one more list of things that I think is really important that we continue to ignore.
So we're going to not shy away from current events. And again, the significance of who speaks up and who stays silent. And I want to circle back a little bit to what we talked about a touch at the end of our last episode, which is the in order of operations. I sometimes feel like I was taught, and certainly it was communicated to us as this platform grew, that following the leader was the very most important thing that one could do in Mormonism. And to that end, I am, let me just say, I'm concerned. I'm concerned, and I really hope I'm wrong here. But if, even on an unconscious level, leaders of a worldwide church, even a small one like Mormonism, are choosing not to speak up on certain issues, to me, sometimes it may feel, or at least is, it's a good thought experiment to wonder why they are not speaking up on certain issues when these very same issues might also be problematic for the institution itself that is staying quiet. Okay, now what I mean by that is contemporary issues that are not being discussed right now in 2026, when it feels like we're barraged with all sorts of problems at the hands of our national government. The LDS Church is saying nothing about widespread government dishonesty and corruption, about white male leadership and underreporting of sex scandals, of immigration violence. As a matter of fact, the church in 2025 actually, in commenting about some earlier immigration issues, actually chose to make a public statement around this topic that church property should not be used to shield individuals from law enforcement, emphasizing obedience to the law. Emphasizing obedience to the law over the protection of our brothers and sisters who were in harm's way. Also, the church has chosen to stay silent in 2026 around issues of extreme war and genocide, largely believed to be unjustified by the United States government towards foreign countries as an ally of Israel, which is another Christian nationalist thing. This idea that we side with the state of Israel no matter what because of some Christian fundamentalist mythology, that this is sort of end of days business, and it doesn't matter what Israel does, but good Christians support Israel at any cost, even if the lives of thousands are being taken because of unjustified war. I feel like I've said plenty. What do you have?
Yeah, so I think the thing that really strikes me on this is again, like you said, the silence. Now, I want to read from the 98th section of the Doctrine and Covenants, okay? This is from our own Doctrine and Covenants. It says, nevertheless, so this is 98 verse 9 and 10. It says, nevertheless, when the wicked rule, the people mourn. Wherefore, honest men and wise men should be sought for diligently, and good men and wise men ye shall observe to uphold. Okay? Otherwise, whatsoever is less than these cometh of evil. So, in our own doctrine, we teach that we have to be able to uphold honest and wise and good people, because when the wicked rule, the people mourn. And when we have leaders who have been convicted of crimes, when we have leaders who are blanketly pardoning other people who have been convicted of crimes because those people were friends to when we have leaders who have been involved in some of the most heinous sex trafficking that has ever been seen in our modern day, and we don't question whether or not these are honest and good and wise people, or we don't at least teach that principle. We don't come out and say, hey, as a reminder, we should be looking for good and honest and wise people to be our leaders. That silence on our doctrine from the 98th section of the Doctrine and Covenants becomes an endorsement of things that are evil.
Amen, amen, amen. This is significant, is that this contemporary silence around issues connected to the Epstein files, government corruption, war and violence, and death, both in Iran, throughout the Middle East, and by Latin American immigrants, by untrained and masked ICE agents. I mean, this is violence and corruption at a scale that is unprecedented in most of our lives. And it is, I believe, the call of churches to stand up publicly on our behalf in solidarity with other churches that are doing the same thing with their own different traditions, and saying we unitedly stand up against corruption and harm at the hands of leadership that are doing harm to us as a people. If church leadership is not publicly saying that, then I can't fathom them doing I see and experience them as part of the problem. Because if you are not standing up against it, to me, it sort of feels like you're endorsing it.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So, again, I would just kind of circle back around to this idea that the original statement of the church is that it wants to provide moral guidance, right? Okay. But what ends up happening is that in certain issues, it provides more than moral guidance. It's providing hands on explanations of how you should vote. And again, I'll specifically cite the ERA, and I'll specifically cite the Prop 8 in California. Okay. But then in other issues, it's not even providing moral guidance, like how we treat our criminals, how we treat our immigrants, how we treat our poor, and what we expect from our government leaders in terms of the morality that we should be upholding in those positions. They're not even giving the moral guidance on those issues.
Well, and if anything, it feels as if we are left to assume what their morality is by their silence. Because one of two things is happening here. Either they don't see it as important, maybe they are, sheltered enough, and it's not up in their faces enough for it to feel threatening to them. It also could be that they are perhaps recognizing, I don't think this is the case because I think this would be a little bit too self-aware, but recognizing in the case of, say, for example, honesty issues or corruption or sexual underreporting, that they're kind of staying silent because they too have some shadows in the closet that have not been addressed. But it also occurs to me, possibly more likely, that the safe bet here is that we sort of point people towards the 12th article of faith and say, just follow your leaders. That'll keep you safe. Because at very least, if we can keep our constituency following their leaders, as corrupt as they may be, at least we know that maybe they'll continue to follow us too. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I am wanting to have this conversation because I think it's an important one. I think the silence is important. I think the voices that choose to speak up are important as well. So next episode, we're going to be jumping into, I kind of made a mistake at the end of episode 1, I told you what we were going to talk about in episode 3. Nathan's like, did you want to skip episode 2? I said, no, I just was not paying attention to where I was on my notes. So next time we are going to be talking specifically about the organizations that step up and characteristics of them. And I'm going to be giving a bunch of examples of them. And then we're going to really break down 2 types of religion and talk about what these 2 types of religion, the constituencies they serve, because they actually serve different people at different levels of development. So this is going to be a little bit of a kind of a walking through and wrapping our brains around what brings certain religions the ability or the desire to voice up and not. And it isn't necessarily because of, just certain people being, like some are good and some are bad. Really, in some ways, it has to do with, like you said, Nathan, what do they fear? What are they trying to protect? And it really all boils down to where are they in their moral and consciousness development. So we will jump into that next time. Thanks y'all so much for your support, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Latter-day Struggles. If this podcast has supported your faith journey, we invite you to explore the many ways you can continue your healing and growth with us. On our website, you'll find support and processing groups, marriage and parenting courses, and free resources to support where you are in your faith journey. You can also join Valerie in the live fellowship gatherings throughout the year, where we connect, process the podcast, and build meaningful friendships with others on similar paths. If cost has ever been a barrier, we offer podcast scholarships funded by listener donations. To explore all of these offerings, visit the link in today's show notes or go to latterdaystruggles.com. And if this podcast has been meaningful to you, leaving a 5-star review is one of the most powerful ways to help others find this work. Latter-day Struggles is proud to be part of the Dialogue Podcast Network.
Dialogue Podcast Network.